So you know a credit card might be in a little bit of trouble when it is by far and away the most talked about credit card in a Reddit thread called "What is the most overrated credit card?" And whether you watched my analysis of the overrated credit cards talked about in that thread or not, the clear winner, or loser depending on how you want to look at it, was the Chase Sapphire Reserve. Now, Reddit threads aside, there have been some things that I've wanted to discuss about the CSR for quite some time. And I think it's time to head on address the big questions. What's going on with the Chase Sapphire Reserve? Is this card completely fallen off? And is there any hope for revival in the future? Let's get right into it. Today, I want to touch on three things. First, the current state of the Chase Sapphire Reserve, and specifically the problems it's facing right now. Then we'll shift over and look at the competition. What are others doing around it that makes the Chase Sapphire Reserve feel like it's moving in neutral? Finally, I want to talk about a redemption case for this card. Is there a use case for it now? And if so, who's this card for? And if not, what would I like to see in this card to bring it to the status that we'd all like to see it at? Let's level the field from the beginning and talk about the current state of the card. So everyone's on the same page. The Sapphire Reserve carries a $550 annual fee. It comes with a standard sign-up bonus that pegs pretty consistently around 60,000 ultimate rewards points. In real term, cash or travel redemption value, that's about $900 right there on the sign-up bonus. The card earns 10x back on hotels and rental cars booked through Chase Travel. It earns 5x on flights, also booked through Chase Travel, 3x on dining or other travel, and then a flat 1x back on everything else. However, where most people feel that they get the most value working down on that annual fee is of course through the benefits ingrained in just holding the card. The biggest one that you cannot forget is the $300 annual travel credit. It's safe to say, even in a more negative centered video on this card, that travel credit is the most flexible travel credit on any credit card. And the $300 comes off on your first $300 in essentially whatever is categorized as a travel purchase. After that, the card also adds value by giving you a 50% point boost when redeeming Chase Ultimate Rewards points through Chase's own travel portal. It has a TSA PreCheck and global entry credit, as well as lounge access through a priority pass, but also through a network of Chase Sapphire lounges by the club. By the way, I should mention that you get one guest in that access plan. Chase is also known for having a great list of transfer partners, including Southwest, and an all-time favorite, Hyatt, and the card has some other benefits such as travel protections and some minor credits like a DoorDash one going on right now. So on the surface, if you're just listening to that in a vacuum, the card probably seems pretty okay, at least solid and no worse than that, right? Well, here are 5 negatives that have been standing out to me when you just break down those earnings and also the benefits the card carries. The first thing to note about what you just heard is that this has been consistent for years. In that issue number 1 is that the card just hasn't really been touched by Chase for a refresh. Sure, we've seen updates like refreshed Dash Pass status and DoorDash credits being extended through 2027, but when you look at some other similar cards, they're constantly getting updates and refreshes appealing to new markets and giving new people opportunity out there to find value. For example, let's start right at home with Chase issued United cards, which the lineup of 4 all went through a refresh on their end. On the other side, you have Amex led by the Platinum card, which is constantly changing and tweaking and increasing the annual fee and adding credits to their entire lineup of cards. My second issue is with the annual fee. Now, $550, again, on the surface doesn't pop out as being problematic. However, after you get through the $300 travel credit, it's not entirely clear what the pathway to success in reducing that effective annual fee and getting positive value out of the card really is. Sure, the 50% point boost when combined with a significant amount of ultimate rewards points can offset that $250. What do you do once your Chase points are low or completely gone on a redemption? Or how do you find that value if you decide to use one of Chase's transfer partners, which aren't exclusive to the Sapphire Reserve, and your point balance is essentially 0? That starts to hit a little bit closer to home for those of you who have had the Chase Sapphire Reserve for a number of years. Issue number 3 is overlapping categories within the entire Chase lineup. I mean, really, in how many cards can we see the 3x dining and then similar non-creative reward structures that really pigeonhole you into getting a different Chase card, literally maybe just for one separate earnings category. The only real game changer in the earnings on the Sapphire Reserve is maybe the 10x through the portal on hotels and rental cars, and then that flat 3x on travel, which is a unique and powerful category. However, the card just doesn't bring anything new to the table. Issue 4 that I see is that the perks just don't overwhelm you anymore. Let's start with lounge access. First of all, priority pass, that can be nice, but I actually just made an entire breakdown video on the status of lounges here, especially in the United States. And if you're relying on priority pass through the Sapphire Reserve for the variety of lounges, well, the conclusion to that entire video was you may be disappointed. The Sapphire Reserve card does come with Chase Sapphire lounge access as well. However, the problem with those is that there are only 7 in existence, and they're very concentrated in specific locations or overseas. The card also has some travel protections, but are they worth what you still need to make up for that annual fee? And there's also no airline status or hotel perks to speak of. Finally, I want to say that the 1.5x multiplier on your ultimate rewards points is great. However, the Sapphire Preferred offers almost all of that with a 1.25x multiplier on your points, and it does it with about a $450 less annual fee. That's 5 issues when stacked side by side. Feel like a lot of problems. But I think in one sentence, the Chase Sapphire Reserve, it's just gotten stale. All right, let's take a second and completely switch gears. I want to talk about the competition. The cards that the Chase Sapphire Reserve is slowly being passed by, and that most of you are probably looking at getting in comparison to the Sapphire Reserve and deciding that the CSR, it just doesn't stack up. Let's start with the card that's beating the Sapphire Reserve from inside its own issuer. This is, of course, the Chase Sapphire Preferred. At a $95 annual fee, I would go and say that the Sapphire Preferred offers about 80% of the power that the Sapphire Reserve gives you. You have access to the same transfer partners, and if you prefer to work the transfer partner system for surplus value, well, then there's no use for that 1.5x multiplier that you can get inside of Chase's travel portal. If you do look to the travel portal, well, is there that much of a difference between 1.25x on the Sapphire Preferred and 1.5 on the Sapphire Reserve? For some people, I think not. And then finally, the Sapphire Preferred basically has the same earnings categories, so it's not really a big difference on the points coming in. Another massive option that if I had to bet is outdoing the Sapphire Reserve in new applicants is the Capital One Venture X. In my opinion, this card is a big problem, not just for Chase, but also for American Express and any other premium card out there. And that's because it starts off at a $395 annual fee and gives you premium benefits without a premium price tag. The Venture X also earns you 2x flat on every single thing you buy. It's so much easier to get points coming in the door on the Venture X than with a flat 1x back on the Chase Sapphire Reserve that even though the Chase Sapphire Reserve points are going to be worth more when redeemed, you have so many more coming in with the Venture X. The Venture X also straight up challenges the Sapphire Reserve in having those same elevated multipliers when booked through their own portal for hotels, rental cars, and flights. It also has a $300 travel credit. Sound familiar? Yeah, probably. But the Capital One Venture X also tacks on 10,000 bonus miles at the end of every single year. That's all done for what works out to be an effective annual fee that is nowhere close to what you have to pay to hold the Sapphire Reserve. And another card, let's talk about the Amex Platinum. I'm not going to roll through the benefits in detail, but the core message behind the Platinum that the Sapphire Reserve seems to have missed is that if you do a halfway decent job of attacking the Platinum credits, there's at least a workable roadmap to take the $695 annual fee and reduce that down to zero, thus at least breaking even on the card and probably a little bit more, especially if you're using the Platinum benefits really well. And then last but not least, I'll say that premium airline cards are also starting to give the Sapphire Reserve a run for their money. I think there are a lot of people out there who are starting to shift their attention later on in their wallet setups from a general travel credit card to one with a brand that they just know, love, and would prefer to use their services and really max out the experience that they can get. This is what a premium airline credit card provides that a card like the Sapphire Reserve just can't really match up to. These type of cards provide elite lounge access. We're talking many locations with a high quality experience. Tangible benefits like free checked bags and upgraded boarding. Finally, those cards can offer great status with your favorite airline, whereas the Sapphire Reserve doesn't really offer any perks in that sort of category. So what we have here is a card with at least 5 glaring issues. And then you look around and you start to see other, maybe better cards pushing and surpassing what used to be a great travel card from Chase. However, I'm going to tell you that's not it. And I want to look last at what this card can still do really incredibly well for a very specific person, and talk about the redemption story that I'd like to see that would bring it back to being one of the best, if not the best credit cards that you could possibly get. So first, let's talk about the savvy credit card user that still can use the Sapphire Reserve in its very current state today for extreme value. The Sapphire Reserve is designed for a certain lifestyle, but also probably a certain location of the country too. Let me tell you where I see it best. I think the best representation of how to use this card is probably shown by Jake McCurr. Sorry, Jake, if I'm getting your last name wrong there. I believe he maximizes the CSR really well. Jake lives just outside of New York City. So he's taking advantage of the 3x back on travel, which is actually quite an expansive category for what you can include in there, with a lot of general transportation options that are offered in bigger cities. Finally, Chase just in general has a massive presence in New York, and you can really tap into lounge access in that city, for example, JFK or LaGuardia, and then just going along, not specifically with Jake, but with anybody who lives in a big city, you could probably tap into those DoorDash credits and that DoorDash status and really make a more effective use in that compared to if you live somewhere out in the countryside. You're probably not eating out as much or ordering DoorDash and taking advantage of the benefit or the dining multiplier. Now, maybe this type of person who lives in a city, eats out a lot, and will take advantage of their airports is exactly the person Chase wants. But in my opinion, that's just not most people out there, which is why I would like to offer a few suggestions for what I think can bring the Sapphire Reserve back to that top status. First of all, this card needs anniversary points or some sort of a loyalty bonus. This directly addresses the problem that you have when you run out of Chase points and then your 1.5x in the travel portal is essentially a useless benefit. The perfect level for this card is 5,000 Chase Ultimate Rewards points given at the end of every year. That's at least $50 in value. It's a very fair offer for holding an annual fee card like this for a year and fits really well for Chase's theme of holding a valuable point currency. The next option I'd like to see is just the return of restaurant access through Priority Pass. It could change what is right now a very mid-lounge access and make it top tier. Let's also consider some category changes. I think 2 that fit really well are potentially a streaming category inside of this card. We already know that Chase loves overlapping categories, so that would fit in perfectly with their brand identity. And I also think an entertainment category would fit very well with the brand mantra of the Sapphire Reserve being a travel, dining, and just experience card. Another option would be building either an airline or an option for hotel status into the framework of the card. I understand this may require an annual fee increase, but I think a lot of people would actually consider that as a positive thing because we're completely missing any sort of hotel or airline benefits on this travel credit card. Chase has 2 strong partnerships to work with in Southwest and United already in their network. And if they couldn't secure an airline or a hotel, you could at least throw some level of rental car status in there and add that marketing push into this card's package. Finally, no matter what happens with any of those other suggestions, Chase, at the very minimum, has to continue to build out the Sapphire Lounge network. What other premium lounge spaces have done is to completely blow away what Chase offers, and Chase, to be competitive, needs to offer more and better lounge access. All in all, I just wanted to share my thoughts and perspective on how I see this card today. I'd love to hear how you use and get value from this card, or if you're seeing the same problems that I am that have prevented you from getting the card up to this point. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.